Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Natalie Solden on the communications team for the Office of Science. Welcome to the Office of Science's informational webinar on basic energy sciences, reaching a new energy sciences workforce. Before we begin, I have a few logistics to go over. This meeting will be recorded. The recording of this meeting will be posted next week to the website, and I'll drop a link into the chat in a little bit. There are closed captions available. Please click on the closed captions button to enable them. After the presentation, there will be a question and answer session. Please use the Q&A box in Zoom to ask your questions. With that, I'd like to introduce you to Andy Schwartz, the Division Director for Materials Sciences and Engineering.
Great. Thank you very much, Natalie. And welcome everyone to this webinar. As Natalie said, this is a DOE Office of Science informational webinar. We're going to cover a funding opportunity announcement, or FOA, that Basic Energy Sciences has issued recently, entitled Reaching a New Energy Sciences Workforce, or BES Renew. My name is Andy Schwartz, as Natalie said, Division Director in Basic Energy Sciences. A number of my colleagues are here with me today. I'm not going to go through introducing them all in the interest of time, but I do want to give them lots of credit for putting together not just the funding opportunity announcement, but also the slides that we're going to show you throughout the webinar today. And again, we'll have plenty of time for question and answer at the end. And this webinar, as Natalie said, will be recorded, and both the copy of the slides as well as the recording will be posted to the website by next week. I will point out the disclaimer on the lower right here, which essentially says that this is meant to be a summary of the funding opportunity announcement, but the details that are in the funding opportunity announcement are the determinative facts, and you should, of course, refer to that document for all information about the funding opportunity announcement. We have some key dates here. The funding opportunity announcement, or FOA, was issued in early January, so it is currently open for submissions. There is a deadline in February, the 21st of February, for pre-applications. Those are required, so you must submit a pre-application if you are interested in submitting an application to this funding opportunity announcement. We will evaluate those pre-applications, and I'll talk about that later in the presentation, and provide a response back to all applicants by the 24th of March. And those who are encouraged to submit applications, the due date for those applications will be on the 2nd of May. There's an email address down here in the lower left. This will come up a couple more times throughout the presentation, bes-renew.foa@science.doe.gov. Questions about the content of the funding opportunity announcement that are not answered during this webinar, you can reach out to us through that email address and get your questions answered. So Renew, or Reaching a New Energy Sciences Workforce, is a relatively new program, not just for Basic Energy Sciences, but across the whole Office of Science in the Department of Energy. And it is intended to build foundations through undergraduate and graduate training opportunities for students and those at institutions that are historically underrepresented in the Office of Science, or SC, research portfolio. This actually was initiated last year, fiscal year 2022, last fiscal year, with 6 programs across the Office of Science, including BES issuing awards totaling $32 million. There are now 7 funding opportunity announcements across the office. I'll show you those at the end of the presentation. The other ones with total funding of at least $56 million. This all started back actually a couple of years ago when the Office of Science conducted a series of outreach and listening sessions, trying to assess the barriers to participation in opportunities, research opportunities supported by our office, and use those really to inform these fiscal year 2022 funding opportunities, which were seen as a pilot, really a piloting of models to support and directly address the barriers that came up through these listening sessions and outreach activities. And certainly as we move into those active awards, we're going to be doing a assessment and evaluation of the success of those models, and use those to inform future funding opportunity announcemements. As we move into fiscal year 2023, the budget allows us to nearly double the investment in this program, which is wonderful. And so, as I've mentioned, there are now 7 different funding opportunity announcements, including the one that we'll be summarizing today from Basic Energy Sciences. that are active and open at this time. There is a single web page that is the one-stop shop for this initiative, science.osti.gov/initiatives/renew, and you can go there to find more information. So basic energy sciences, for those of you who are not familiar with BES, this is one of a number of program offices within the Office of Science. The Office of Science is the basic science arm of the Department of Energy. There are other programs within the department that support more applied research, technology, development and deployment. But the basic science is funded through the Office of Science. And for BES, the mission is to understand, predict, and ultimately control matter and energy at the most fundamental levels, electronic, atomic, and molecular levels. We fulfill this through a series of activities. We support basic research to discover new materials and design new chemical processes that underpin a broad range of energy technologies, including, of course, clean energy technologies. BES also operates a suite of world-class scientific national laboratories and particularly user facilities in X-ray, neutron, and electron beam scattering, as well as 5 nanoscale science research centers. These are open access user facilities available to any researcher who's interested in using them. And for non-proprietary research, they are free of charge. There's lots more information about the user facilities on our website. And of course, in order to operate those facilities, we have to build and upgrade those. So a significant portion of the activities within BES goes toward the construction and upgrade of those facilities to maintain their capabilities at the leading edge. The goals of this Renew program for BES are to increase participation of underrepresented groups in BES in and across the BES research portfolio. We would like to advance a diverse, equitable, and inclusive research community and research ecosystem, which we see as a key to providing the scientific and technical expertise for U.S. scientific leaderships in the fields that BES supports. As we'll show you in a moment, this program leverages partnerships with the DOE national laboratories that I just mentioned, the DOE user facilities that I mentioned, as well as leading R1 minority serving research institutions. And I'll talk about those partnerships and how the partnerships are built into the Renew program in the upcoming slides. The primary focus of the Renew program is to provide training activities, particularly internships, as well as research opportunities for students, undergrad and grad students, postdoctoral researchers, and faculty from non-R1 minority serving institutions. That includes the historically Black colleges and universities, many of which are currently underrepresented in the BES research portfolio. The funding opportunity announcement that we issued a few weeks ago focuses on providing these training opportunities across, as I said, across the breadth of basic energy sciences research, which is fundamental chemical and material sciences research. And we define 6 topical areas in the funding opportunity announcement. You can find more details there, and I'm not going to read to you all of the words on this slide in the interest of time. But these 6 topical areas are the following: scattering and instrumentation sciences, condensed matter and materials physics, materials discovery, design, and synthesis, fundamental interactions, chemical transformations, and photochemistry and biochemistry. So each of the applications, each of the pre-applications submitted in response to this funding opportunity announcement must identify one of these topical areas and research that's relevant, basic fundamental research that's relevant to one of these 6 topical areas. And those are the topical areas that define the breadth of basic energy sciences research. You can find more information about the breadth of this BES research in the following locations. First of all of the programs within basic energy sciences hold annual or biannual principal investigator meetings, and the abstracts from those meetings are all available on our website. There are 2 links here because they're divided into the two divisions within BES, the Material Sciences and Engineering Division, or MSE, and the Chemical Sciences, Geosciences and Biosciences Division, or CSGB. And so these links here take you to a page on which you can find the recent proceedings from those principal investigator meetings. By looking at those abstracts gives you a great insight into the type of science that is currently supported through those portfolios, and you can figure out where your research might fit within the BES portfolio. I'll also point out this link here to BES reports, and this is just what we're shown here on the cover of a small subset of the reports that are available. There's a whole series of reports available on our website from workshops that we organized broadly known as the basic research needs workshops, where we have held workshops inviting in members of the scientific research communities to develop a vision to the future in certain topical areas. And these become really useful strategic guiding documents that give us the directions in which to invest in order to support future energy technologies. Again, the research is basic science, but it's basic science aimed at supporting the DOE mission in the future. And you can see some of the titles here, and again, many more available on this website. So getting into some of the details from the funding opportunity announcement, and the next set of slides is pulling information essentially directly from the FOA, and I've referenced the sections. We have referenced the sections of the FOA that are being discussed here. So for this funding opportunity announcement, the lead institution must be domestic, U.S. institution, and also must be classified as a minority serving institution, but not listed as an R1 research institution. The classification for minority serving institutions comes from the Department of Education using various sources. The R1 classification, meaning very high research activity, is based on the Carnegie classification of institutions of higher education. And what we've done on our website, the Office of Science has done, is to develop a list of institutional eligibility. So this is a list of educational institutions, essentially all educational institutions in the United States. And one can look at that list. You can look for your institution on that list to determine if, based on these criteria up here, your institution qualifies as an MSI and is not listed as an R1 research institution, because those are the eligibility requirements for this particular FOA, a minority serving institution that is not currently listed as an R1 research institution. We also require that each of those lead institutions partner with a single DOE national laboratory or user facility, or a single R1 minority serving institution. There can be additional non-R1 MSIs as partners, but there must be only a single R1 MSI or DOE lab user facility partner. All other institution types are not eligible even as a partner. So one of the non-R1 MSIs must be identified as the lead institution on the application. The others are identified as subrecipients or partner institutions. The lead principal investigator must be affiliated with that lead institution, not surprising. And from a budgetary perspective, the lead institution must receive the largest fraction of the proposed budget, not necessarily the majority, but the largest budget must go to the lead institution by the rules of the FOA. In addition, 15 to 25% of the proposed budget must be allocated to this larger partner institution, the DOE National Lab, user facility, or R1 MSI, to ensure that there's active participation, engagement, and mentorship coming from the researchers at that institution. We really feel that the strong connection between the lead non-R1 MSI institution and the partner institution is a critical component of the success of the Renew program. If there are multi-institutional teams, and essentially all of these will be multi-institutional teams because of the required partnership, those teams submit a single application with a designated lead institution, again, the non-R1 MSI that is the lead, and the other team members proposed as subrecipients. If you currently have active collaboration with researchers at an R1 MSI or at a DOE National Lab, you're welcome to reach out to them directly and engage in a discussion about a potential partnership and a potential application together. If you're curious about finding out more information, if you have not worked with the DOE National Labs in the past and you're interested about making connections there, we've provided a list. It's on our website on the funding opportunities page, and we've shown you a few screenshots here. So when you get to the funding opportunities page, if you scroll down, you'll find this FOA, this funding opportunity, the BES Renew FOA, and right below the FOA itself is a list of DOE National Lab partner contact information for each of the DOE National Labs. And so this is an opportunity for you to reach out to a national lab that you believe does work in the field that you are working in to explore the possibility of identifying partner investigators that you could work with. So we encourage you, if you would like to do so, to reach out to those points of contact at those labs with a short description of your proposed research and, if known, potential lab PIs. But if not known, you can certainly ask them for their suggestions. It's a way of trying to establish connections and explore partnership opportunities with the DOE National Lab Complex. Okay, a couple of slides, and these are words pulled mainly from the directly from the funding opportunity announcement. A couple slides on budget and costs and what is allowable. Not surprisingly, all costs that are requested in the budget must adhere to standard requirements for all federal awards, which are specified in the regulations. But for example, allowable costs do include buying out of faculty time dedicated to teaching or administrative responsibilities to allow individuals to focus their attention on the research and mentorship required for this program. Support for administrative personnel dedicated to the proposed activity, support for professional development, training, mentoring of students and junior researchers. Again, the internship, training, and mentoring aspects of Renew are central to the goals of the program and therefore must be supported. Travel, particularly travel to the partner institution for internships and research at those institutions, but also for collaborative meetings, conferences, workshops, etc. Fringe benefits paid in accordance with the institution's negotiated rates, etc. Temporary dependent care costs incurred during travel are allowable. Membership costs in professional societies are also typically allowable costs. And second slide, continuing that, instrumentation to conduct the proposed research, equipment, which are the larger, longer useful life than typically per item acquisition costs more than $5,000 if required to conduct the proposed research are allowable. Stipends and benefits for students and other researchers, recognizing that their dual role as both trainees and employees, and that the traineeships are really the important focus of this funding opportunity announcement. Salaries and support to cover time to participate in outreach for recruitment, internships, and training events, science team meetings, partnership development, or information gathering, and all other direct costs such as materials and supplies, et cetera, are allowable under this funding opportunity announcement. And again, the details are in the funding opportunity announcement. We just wanted to give you a sense of the breadth of what can be proposed as part of this application. I also want to make a comment about living wages. This is not just specific to the Renew, but across the Office of Science. There really has been a strong increased emphasis and commitment to ensuring that federally funded research through our programs supports people at a living wage. And so the following is a quotation directly from the funding opportunity announcement, saying that the Office of Science, SC, is committed to ensuring that students, trainees, and postdoctoral fellows are paid a fair and equitable wage sufficient to allow a reasonable standard of living. Applicant institutions are strongly encouraged to examine their institutional pay scales to ensure that all personnel earn a living wage. Provisions of fellowships, traineeships, stipends, honoraria, subsistence allowances, and other similar payments may be allowable expenses on Office of Science financial assistance awards per the following regulations. And for graduate students, the Office of Science considers a reasonable living wage to be an annual income of $45,000 excluding benefits. Again, these are recommendations and encouragement, but it's an important aspect as our office and really as the department as a whole works to ensure that the people we are supported in a reasonable fashion. Okay, a few more details about the funding opportunity announcement itself. We are soliciting new applications. This is not for continued or renewed funding for existing projects, so we are looking only for new applications. Subject to the availability of funds, we expect to award up to $10 million in current and potential future fiscal year funds to support the awards under this FOA. We anticipate making 3-year awards, so we encourage you to propose 3 years worth of research. Again, always subject to the availability of funds appropriated by Congress. As stated in the FOA, the floor for applications in this FOA is $500,000 per year, including the funding not just to the lead institution, but all the total funding, all partner institutions, and direct and indirect costs, with a floor of $500,000 and a ceiling of $750,000 per year. So scale your application accordingly. Think about the right numbers of people and the type of work to be done to fit within those bounds. The exact number of awards is, of course, going to depend on the merit review and the number of meritorious applications, the availability of funds, the size of the budgets, et cetera. But you can do the math to get some estimates. Each institution, each lead institution or applicant institution is limited to no more than 3 pre-applications, subsequently 3 applications potentially. but institutions may be listed as a subrecipient or a partner on other pre-applications without limitation. So three as the lead, and the individuals, the investigators, are limited to be the lead PI on only one pre-application. But those individuals can submit. Any individual can participate as a senior or key personnel on multiple submissions without limitation. The limitation is only on leading an application. As I said at the outset, a pre-application is required, must be submitted by the date indicated on the cover of the funding opportunity announcement, which is February 21st at 5 p.m. Eastern time. So please don't miss that deadline. It should include, and it must include, and you can read this in the funding opportunity, a clear, concise description of the specific scientific recruitment, mentoring, and inclusion objectives and plans of the proposed project. Again, because of the nature of this program, we're not just looking for what research is to be done, but how is this going to support the traineeship of the individuals who are participating in the activity through recruitment, mentoring, and inclusion. And that portion of both the pre-application and the application is a critical element that will be evaluated at both the pre-application and application stage. Pre-applications will be reviewed for their responsiveness of the proposed work to the research topics defined in the FOA and the goals of this FOA. We may evaluate all or some portion of the pre-applications to determine their competitiveness within a scientific topic, which is to say that if we get a large response in certain topical areas, we may evaluate those pre-applications to determine which we think are the most competitive, and we will only encourage applications from those that rise to the top of that group. We will send a response by email to each applicant, encouraging or discouraging the submission of the application. I noted that response date earlier, and it is on the cover page of the funding opportunity announcement. I think it is March 24th, if I remember correctly. Pre-applications also should include a listing of individuals who should not serve as merit reviews of a subsequent potential application. That is primarily the list of collaborators for the individuals who are applying. Those collaborators are conflicted from serving as merit reviewers. And there is a template available, for an Excel template available on our website at the link here for providing that information. I'll show you a screenshot of what that page looks like, the Grants and Cooperative Agreements Forms page, and the collaborator template is linked right here. So I strongly encourage you to use that template. It will make it much easier for you and much easier for us to receive the information. All of the applications, those pre-applications that are encouraged may submit applications. All of the applications are subject to scientific merit review or peer review that is outside the Department of Energy, with subject matter experts who we recruit and ask to provide their expert review of each of the applications. And they will be evaluated using the following 5 criteria. These criteria are listed in the funding opportunity announcement: scientific or technical merit of the project, appropriateness of the proposed method or approach, the quality and efficacy of the promoting inclusive and equitable or peer equitable research plan or peer plan, which is a requirement of the funding opportunity announcement, and the description of what should be in such a peer plan is also included in the funding opportunity announcement. I will note that this is now a requirement in all Office of Science funding opportunity announcement, not just this Renew program, but across all Office of Science FOAs, we are requiring peer plans. The competency of the applicant's personnel, the adequacy of proposed resources, and finally, the reasonableness and appropriateness of the proposed budget. And if you look into the funding opportunity announcement, there's some additional questions after each one of these criteria that will be provided to the scientific peer reviewers, but also are a great guide to you to understand what information you should be putting into your application in order to make it easiest for the peer reviewers to evaluate each of these 5 criteria. Okay, key dates. I've said most of these before, but just by way of reiteration, the pre-application due date is the 21st of February by 5 p.m. Eastern time. Those pre-applications get submitted into a system called PAMS, or Portfolio Analysis and Management System. The link is shown here. Those pre-applications need to be submitted by an institutional official. Someone in your sponsored research office, and actually I think I'll come to that in a moment, remind you of that in a moment. Pre-applications, as I said, we will respond no later than the 24th of March. And for those that are encouraged to submit an application, it will be due on the 2nd of May. The applications will actually be submitted into a government-wide system called grants.gov. We anticipate award selection in the summer, and that awards will be made during this fiscal year, FY 2023, which ends at the end of September. So the next couple of slides show you, give you a list of some, not all, but some common errors, and they're sort of a checklist of how to avoid these errors. The first slide focusing on the pre-applications. And the first one is to say, which I reiterated up front, that this is a basic science organization, and we are looking for basic science. So applied research and technology development will typically be deemed outside of the scope of the funding opportunity announcement. I mentioned the requirement to include the list of individuals who should not serve as reviewers using the template that's provided on the website. And for the pre-application, that template should then be emailed to the address shown here, the same address I showed on the first slide. There's also a lot more information on how to compile this list and who should be on the list in this section 8.a.10 of the funding opportunity announcement. Pre-application, as I said in the previous slide, needs to be submitted by a user at the PI's institution with the submit to DOE privileges in this PAM system, which are typically people who work in the institutional sponsored research office or the equivalent. So we strongly recommend that you reach out to your Office of Sponsored Research or whatever it's called at your institution to ensure that you are in close contact well ahead of the deadline with those people. The pre-application will be written by the investigators, by the researchers, and released in PAMs to this sponsored research office so that they can submit it to Department of Energy prior to the deadline. But as I said, the pre-applications go in through the PAM system 5 p.m. February 21st. When submitting, you are asked to select a program manager. We are requesting that everybody select one program manager, Claudia Muse, whose name is shown here, so that all of them are attached to her name in the system, making it easier for us to organize our review. If you have questions that aren't answered today, questions that come up after this webinar, again, BES-renew.FOA is a general email inbox, which we'll take those questions and respond to them as quickly as possible. And I'll point out that late submissions of pre-apps after this February 21st deadline are rarely accepted. There are some exceptions that can be considered, but I would strongly encourage you to start early and submit early and not get pushed up against the deadline. Similarly, for applications, the same table of conflicts of interest collaborators is required for the applications, though it is to be submitted as part of the application package in grants.gov. We encourage you to use the Microsoft Excel template that is provided on the website that I mentioned earlier. Budget, there's no budget information in the pre-application, but of course at the application stage, budget must be included. And as I mentioned earlier, the lead institution must request the largest percentage of the budget. The partner institution should receive 15 to 25% of the total proposed budget. The partner institution being the national lab or the R1 minority serving institution. Biographical sketches and current lists of current and pending support are required for all senior key personnel. The details of how to fill those out and what information should be included is also in the funding opportunity announcement. You do not need to include lists of individuals who are conflicted on those documents because, as noted here, that is included separately. As I mentioned before, the application goes to grants.gov, not to PAMs. The deadline for submission for those, if encouraged, will be May 2nd. Cutoff there will be 11:59 p.m. Eastern time. But once again, we strongly encourage you to start the process early and even submit early to avoid any technical or other errors that can happen at the last minute. Because again, late submissions of applications are very rarely accepted. Okay, and before I wrap up, I think I only have 2 or 3 more slides. This is lots of information. And again, I believe that Natalie may be putting a bunch of links into the chat. So if people are interested in some of the links I've shared, they'll be there. But of course, these slides and the recording will be available in a week or so on our website at this location. So the slides will be, at this location, the funding opportunity announcement site, which is where we will also post the slides and the recording. I mentioned this earlier, the Office of Science Renew program has a web page, lots of information across the Office of Science. Here's the link to Basic Energy Sciences, as well as the PI meetings that I mentioned earlier for the 2 divisions, Material Sciences and Chemical Sciences, Geosciences and Biosciences. And I mentioned the recording. We include links here for the help desk or information for the help desk, both the PAMS help desk, where you will be submitting your pre-application, as well as the grants.gov help desk, if you need support at the application submission stage. And finally, I'll reiterate one more time, questions about the funding opportunity announcement can be submitted by email to bes-renew.foa@science.doe.gov. So now that you're on the webinar, you can be submitting your questions into the Q&A for answers. Finally, this is a total eye chart. You will not be able to read this in the few seconds that I leave it up, but I mentioned earlier that this is the basic energy science is one of 7 Renew funding opportunity announcements that are currently open across the Office of Science. The other program areas that are shown here, the advanced scientific computing research, biological and environmental research, fusion energy sciences, high energy physics, nuclear physics, and isotope R&D and production. And to the extent that any of you are working in those areas, I would encourage you to look not just at the BES FOA, but at those, because you actually may have opportunities, or you may even fit better within the topical areas in those funding opportunity announcements. I will say that some of the eligibility, award sizes, and deadlines are different. They're not all the same across these. So to the extent that you're interested in one of these other FOAs, you need to go look at the details for that FOA. And with that, I will wrap up. This is my final slide. Please use, if you haven't yet, the Zoom Q&A window, which should be accessible at the bottom of your Zoom window. My guess is that some of my colleagues have already been answering some of the questions asked in text, but we will now, with the last half hour that we have, we will open it up for questions that Natalie will moderate, and I and maybe some of my colleagues will try to answer orally over the next half hour. So thank you for your attention, and thank you for your interest in the BES Renew program. And I turn it over to Natalie for questions.
Great, thanks, Andy. Our first question is, what's the weight in between research and education in the proposal? 50-50? Or is it focusing on research, which education aspect is secondary?
So I would say that we have not defined a specific weighting, though the education or training, what I would say the training aspects of it are really an integral part, and we want to see a strong training. Now that training can come through research. In other words, getting people involved in internships at the National Lab, at the R1 MSI Research Institution is part of training, and providing really strong supports through mentorship and training for those experiences is really what we're looking for. So it's the tying together of the two, I think, that's really important. Not one or the other, but really the integration of the training and the research, so that we are providing, really workforce development more than education, right? If you think about researchers doing scientific research, the support for those individuals, students, undergrad students, graduate students, potentially postdoctoral researchers, providing the supports around their research to ensure success is really what we're looking for.
Okay, thank you. The next question we have is from the FOA. It is mentioned that a non-R1 institute must be the lead institute with a national lab partner or a R1 institute. My question is it either a national lab partner or an R1 institute? For instance, if a national lab is involved, an R1 cannot be considered in the team, correct?
Yes. So there's one. So there. If I understand the question correctly, and I think I'll try to restate it.
Yep.
The lead institution, which is a non-R1 minority serving institution, can have multiple other non-R1 minority serving institution partners, but the partner that is not in that category, the National Lab or the R1 MSI, is a single partner institution that we're looking for in that category. We really want to make sure that the majority of the funds are still flowing to non-R1 minority serving institutions. And so that's why that's the primary reason for limiting the R1 MSI or National Lab to a single partner institution, and you can choose who that partner is.
Thanks. Is there a limit for number of pre-applications submitted from one institution?
As the lead, yes. So the limitation is 3 per lead institution. So any given lead institution may submit a maximum of 3, though that institution can be a partner institution on multiple others, and there's no limitation on the number in which an institution can partner.
And does the pre-proposal require a peers plan too, within the usual 3-page limit?
No. So
Okay.
the peer plan, the specific peer plan that is mentioned in the funding opportunity announcement is a requirement for the application, not for the pre-application. Though we do want the pre-application to cover both the scientific research and the training and mentorship and education aspects of the proposed project.
Okay. I'm a postdoc from an HBCU. Is collaboration still mandated, or?
Sorry, I muted while I was coughing. I apologize. Now I'm back.
That's okay.
So I'm not sure I totally understand the question, but I'll try to do my best to answer it. So we do require that the minority serving institution, the non-R1 minority serving institution, which includes HBCUs, does have a partner institution. So we do require the partnership to be established. So yes, in that sense, the HBCU needs to establish a partnership with a R1 minority serving institution or one of the DOE national labs or user facilities. And user facilities are co-located at the national labs.
Let us know if that answered your question. I think it did.
Please write more if it didn't answer.
Yeah.
We'll do our best.
Yeah. What is the funding ratio for pre-application?
Yeah, so we don't ask for funding. We don't ask for budgetary information in the pre-application. So in that sense, there's not a specific ratio. So we don't even look perhaps through the details. Of course, thinking ahead, as I mentioned, when you eventually write the application, if you're encouraged to do so, you will need to ensure that the lead institution has the largest fraction of the funding. Again, doesn't have to be a majority, but needs to be larger than any of the other institutions. So thinking ahead a little bit as you put together the team and the group, thinking ahead about if the research you're proposing would be supported by that budget is worthy. But again, we don't ask for any budget details in the at the pre-application stage.
Are students and postdocs eligible to apply?
Well, so the application comes from an institution. So the institution applies with whoever. So typically the lead principal investigator on an application from an institution is a researcher, a faculty member at the academic institution. But it is, I think, up to the institution to decide who they would put forward as the lead investigator. Now, students and postdocs are certainly included as members. In fact, I think given that the focus of this is on training of students and early career researchers, it's sort of imperative that they be included. But if it means apply as the lead, I think that's a conversation that has to happen with your institution. And Mike will correct me if I'm wrong.
Can an R1 MSI institute lead the application?
No. The application lead must be a non-R1 minority serving institution. The R1 MSI can only serve as the partner institution. Okay,
thank you. Is there any status limitation for the PIs, for example, green card or citizenship?
No, the PI has to be employed at the lead institution. And if you meet the employment requirements, then there are no, I believe there are no other particular status limitations. So as long as your status allows you to be employed, then you can be named as the PI.
Is there a link to a list of last year's awardees?
There is. So I think if you go to that Office of Science-wide Renew Initiative webpage, you will find the list of awardees, basic energy sciences, and the other programs that were made last year. For us, they were announced in December. I don't remember for the other programs exactly when, but yes, you will find lists of awardees from the last year's opportunity, at least with the names of the lead institutions and the titles of the projects. And I think we're putting together some more details with abstracts for each of those that will be posted if it hasn't already. My colleagues might tell me if I'm correct on that, but I believe there will be more information about last year's awardees in early February, I'm seeing from one of my colleagues. Thank you, Robin.
Just waiting on another question. Is there any limitation regarding the ratio of team versus group member, team/group members from international states versus domestic students? Members.
So if the question is about the individuals, we're not looking at the origin of the individuals. So I would say no, that's up to you. I mean, we're looking for you to propose what you think is the most effective use of funds to meet the objectives of the funding opportunity announcement.
Is there any limitation of number of co-PIs from lead institutions?
No, that is also a decision for you to make. There is no limitation. There, of course, are budgetary caps, as you saw. There's a maximum per year of 750K. So one has to factor that in thinking about how best to make use of those funds and how to get the best out of it. But there's no specific limitation on the number of co-PIs.
Any FOAs, FOAs for R1s in line?
Well, so we have many FOAs. If the question is, can the R1s apply? We have many FOAs. In fact, this is one of the few FOAs that is limited to non-R1s. Most of the funding opportunity announcements issued by the Department of Energy and certainly by Office of Science are open to all universities, including R1s. And so that, in fact, is part of the objective of this FOA to ensure that those institutions that historically have been pretty minimally represented in our portfolio have opportunities. So the Office of Science, for example, has what we generally call the open call. It's a broad funding opportunity announcement issued around October 1 of every year, which is the first beginning of the fiscal year, and it's open for the whole fiscal year, and it covers all the programs within the Office of Science, Basic Energy Sciences, and all the others, and it is broadly open to all U.S. academic institutions, actually to industry as well, though most of the applications we see come from academic institutions. So, and there's other targeted or there are other topical funding opportunity announcements also open to R1 institutions.
And different departments apply multiple applications from the same university?
So yes, within the limitation of 3 pre-applications or applications. So absolutely, the limitation is on the institution, though. So three different departments might be the 3 that submit the pre-applications, but the institution needs to decide which 3, if there are more than 3, which 3 it chooses to go forward with.
Okay, this is related but slightly off topic. Are there other DOE FOAs specifically for MSIs?
So there is currently a funding opportunity announcement open across it's a single funding opportunity announcement across the Office of Science called FAIR, Funding for Accelerated Inclusive Research, which in some sense is kind of a partner, it's kind of a complement to the Renew FOA. So the Renew FOA, as I've tried to emphasize, is really focused on providing opportunities, traineeship, internship opportunities for the individuals, for the people, right? Particularly the early career people and students. And that's critical importance, but the Office of Science would also like to build research capacity and infrastructure at the minority serving institutions. So the FAIR FOA, Funding for Accelerated Inclusive Research, which you can find on our website, is really targeted at that aspect, targeted at building research capacity. So as you train the students, you're also building up the capacity at these broader institutions, minority serving institutions, and a new class of institutions called emerging research institutions, which was defined by Congress in recent legislation, institutions that historically have received a small fraction of federal research dollars. So building up capacity, research capacity of those institutions is the emphasis of FAIR.
Thanks. Any suggestion for resubmission? That's what I have.
So I assume this means someone who submitted a proposal or pre-application or application last year and was not awarded. And so the best suggestion I have is you were provided with the reviews, the merit reviews. Take those seriously. Think about them. There's feedback in that. that you can use. We have changed the scope of this funding opportunity announcement this year. It's broader than it was topically. So again, thinking about what you applied, what project you put forward last year and how it fits into this current funding opportunity announcement is important. And I would encourage you to think about how to make it better going forward. This is competitive. These are competitive funding opportunity announcements. I won't lie about that. It's we have strong proposals, and we have a significant number of proposals that we are evaluating, and with budget limitations. So,
do we need to budget for the stipend of students who do internship at partnering R1 institutions or DOE labs? Any limitation or preference for involving graduate or undergraduate student researchers?
So the first half is easy. The answer is yes. You don't need to, but I assume you would want to budget for that because you do need to support those individuals. So yes, absolutely. You should include in the budget the stipend for the individuals doing the internships, and other costs associated with that, travel costs, et cetera, should be built into the budget for the project. It's part of why we have a fairly reasonable, not reasonably sized budget for these projects, in order to allow for full support of those kind of activities. Certainly no limitations and really no preferences about, well, it says for involving graduate and undergraduate students. I think the preference is that you involve them. If it's a question between undergraduates versus graduates, no, that's a question for you, for your institution, what type of institution you're at, where you think you can have the most positive impact on the individuals. I think that's what you should propose and make the case for in your application.
Great. I am in the physics department of my minority institution. However, we have a very small amount of physics majors. So usually we are looking to train students in chemistry and some engineering majors. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. I mean, I think the more and more interdisciplinary science is great as well. So absolutely, wherever you think, however you think the best way, I would strongly encourage you to, don't get stuck in the, traditional departmental silos. Think broadly as you think about this program.
Is there a limit to how much can be budgeted for equipment at the non-R1 institution?
I think the answer is no, there's nothing written. So we did, as I point out, we have a limit of 25% of the total budget, recommendation of 15 to 25% for the non-R1. Oh, sorry, no, I read this incorrectly. I apologize. Step back.
Okay.
At the non-R1 institution, no, there is no limit on the budget. It has to be justified and reasonable, and so I think that it has to be, if it's needed for the research and you can make the case that it's necessary, there's no formal limit on how much can be budgeted for equipment, with the recognition that these are traineeship programs. So the extreme case, just if you budgeted everything for equipment and weren't training anyone, chances are it would not be a particularly competitive application, right? So just thinking about what the goals are here of this particular funding opportunity announcement, which is really to focus on the training of the people. So to the extent you need the equipment to do that, absolutely make the case for it, but remember that the emphasis is on traineeships.
How could we confirm if the title comes under the given topics?
Well, I guess what you mean is the title of the research or the application you plan to submit, and I would say do the best you can to read how we've described the topics and how they're in the FOA and through the links to our website, and decide whether you think, if you really have a specific question, you could submit the specific question to that BES-renew.FOA email inbox, and we will do our best to try to answer it. Though we can't make a qualitative judgment on the strength of your science, but we can try to give you feedback on whether it is or is not within the scope of our office and of the FOA.
What is the typical internship duration? Like the number of weeks? Yeah,
so we don't have a typical. First of all, this is a pretty new program, so we're just getting going. And I think we've seen different applications. So we don't give guidance on that. I don't think anything in the FOA that specifically speaks to the length the internship. I think that's, again, something we're looking for the community to come back to us and say, hey, what's most effective? What's going to be most beneficial to the individuals. We really do want the people to have the opportunity and advantage of spending time at the national lab or spending time at the R1 research institution, but we also want those people to have ties back to their home institution. So balancing that is really important. And maybe it's, so there's different ways to do that, and there's no one right number, I would say.
Can a non-R1 and non-MSI participate as the lead institute?
So the answer to non-R1 is yes. In fact, the lead institution must be a non-R1, but it must also be an MSI. So a non-MSI is not qualified to participate as the lead. And in fact, a non-MSI is not qualified to participate as the partner institution either. The partner institution is an R1 minority serving institution, again, as defined through the links that I provided earlier. So a non-MSI is not eligible to participate in this funding opportunity announcement.
That's all the questions that I have currently for you. We can wait another minute to see if anything pops up.
I'll take a breath.
Yeah.
Those are great questions, by the way. I'll just thank the participants. You guys are asking really good, pointed questions, and this is exactly the kind of questions you want to be asking as you consider whether to apply, and then if you start to put together an application. Thinking through the details matter, right? And so these are great. I'll remind everyone that this is not the after today you're not done. If you have further questions, the email inbox is available. And my wonderful colleagues here will be monitoring it and doing their best to provide you with the feedback in as timely a fashion as we can, so that you can move forward.
With that, I don't see any further questions.
No, so maybe before you wrap up, Natalie, I'll just
Sure.
First of all say thanks to everyone for participating. We really appreciate your interest in the program. We're excited about this new program, and I'll also reiterate one thing I said earlier. I don't know who's listening. Maybe we have people from the sponsored research offices here or other administrative roles on the webinar, which would be great. But I suspect that the majority of people on the webinar are researchers, and so one thing I would certainly encourage you to do, as I did earlier, is to, if you haven't submitted to DOE before, or maybe you're not familiar with the processes, really work through your institution. Make sure that your institutional supports are there, that you have the right people lined up, that you make sure you get the right people involved early in the process, so that your application is as complete, timely, et cetera, pre-application at this point as it can be, to avoid any of the potential pitfalls of the systems. I can't claim that they're perfect, and I claim that they're the most easy to use. So I think navigating the systems is an important part of the process, and the earlier you start that, the better. I'll leave it at that.
Great. I think we've dropped some links into the chats. I'll just quickly one last question, Andy. Can non-MSI Emerging Research Institute participate?
No.
Okay.
So this particular FOA is limited to, doesn't use the Emerging Research Institution designation. I mentioned that earlier. That was in the context of the FAIR FOA, the Funding for Accelerated Inclusive Research. So that is a definition that's not built into this particular Renew funding opportunity announcement.
Great. Everybody should have the email address, and as well as other links. The recording will be available on the website that we dropped. It'll be available next week, along with the slides, as Andy's mentioned several times. So I think with that, we're good. Thank you so much for attending, and have a good day.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.